This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. So much of your personal info is out of your control, like your insurance provider that has your social security number and your favorite retailer that has your payment details. If they get breached, your information, your identity, is vulnerable. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. The holidays are here, and you know what that means. It's time to get your friends and family the gifts they deserve. Take the stress out of shopping with Amazon's great deals and low prices on a huge range of items from toys to tech and much more. Whoever you're gifting for, Amazon has great prices on everything you need this holiday season. Shop early holiday deals now.
During this election season, enjoy a special sale on your DSR Network membership. Use code ELECTION24 to get 50% off your membership. Because the news might be overwhelming, but the analysis of the news doesn't have to be. Let the DSR Network give you something to look forward to by becoming a member and getting exclusive election content, ad-free listening experiences, and access to our Discord and Slack communities. So up until the election, go to thedsrnetwork.com/buy and use code ELECTION24 to get a discount that will make this election season not only bearable, but enjoyable. That's thedsrnetwork.com/buy and code ELECTION24. We hope you enjoy the show.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. Donald Trump very well could still win this presidential race, but he and his allies are suddenly pointing fingers of blame at others in case of a potential loss. Trump is reportedly angry with Republican National Committee Chair Michael Whatley. He's raging about supposed voter fraud in Pennsylvania, and perhaps most important, his allies are sounding new alarms about the ground game in key swing states. All this comes as new polls show a problem for Trump. While the race is still unquestionably tied, those surveys show that more engaged voters are tilting towards Kamala Harris, which means more pressure on Trump's ground operation to turn out low-propensity voters. And if that operation isn't up to snuff, that's a potential issue for him. Today we're discussing all this with Joel Payne, a senior official at MoveOn. He's going to help us understand what's really happening with both campaigns' ground games and talk about an innovative new technique Democrats are using. Welcome, Joel.
Greg, thanks so much for having me. Good to be with you.
Okay, so Axios reports that Trump has privately blamed RNC Chair Michael Whatley for dropping the ball on supposed election integrity issues, which means he fears a loss. Trump is baselessly claiming on social media that Pennsylvania is already cheating on a large scale. He's worried about the state. And the RNC is suing Bucks County in Pennsylvania. Clearly, the RNC is feeling big-time pressure from Trump to find voter fraud so he can lay the groundwork now to contest a potential loss. Joel, how worried should we be about this? Are Democrats going to be ready for post-election litigation?
Well, Greg, I think your analysis is right. It's really clear that the Trump campaign and his allies are concerned because Kamala Harris is running a much stronger campaign. She's closing stronger than he is. And I think they are setting up a predicate to challenge the results of the election. I think there's something to be concerned with in terms of making sure that the public understands what's happening here. I think what's helpful is that they're doing it out in public and that they've road tested this strategy before. So I think it's easier after 2016 and 2020 to understand what Trump's MO is here. But I think we need to keep voters vigilant and help them understand what they're hearing. It's very likely that whatever happens on election night, Donald Trump is going to claim that he wins regardless of the data.
They certainly have road tested it in the past with a violent attack on the U.S. Capitol. I mean, there's an irony to all this as well. Axios reports that the RNC is putting a bigger priority on quote-unquote election integrity issues than on the ground game. A lot of that, the ground game, has been outsourced to Elon Musk's PAC. Wired magazine now reports that in Michigan, the GOP is largely winging it with its ground operation, leading to some panic. One Trump World source describes the Musk operation as a bunch of grifters. And Joel, this comes after Cameron Joseph reported that despite $75 million that Musk pumped into America PAC, his PAC, to fund the ground game, Republicans privately fear this could be swamped by the ground operation from Harris. Can I ask candidly, what are you guys seeing out there on the ground? I mean, we're getting some mixed signals. Can you clear it up for us?
Well, you mentioned Elon Musk. Let's not leave out Charlie Kirk. He's the other Republican ace in the hole. That's Donald Trump's the dream team that's gonna help him organize the electorate. And look, I certainly I would rather have the folks on the Democratic side, the David Plouffes and the Jen O'Malley Dillons, who are experienced, well-respected organizers, than the folks that Trump have. But we also know that Donald Trump was able to win an election in 2016 with virtually no ground game. So while I'm certainly happy with our team compared to their team, I think we still would be mistaken to drop our guard. In terms of what we're seeing out there, look, there is no doubt from a move on perspective, and we know a lot of our partners in the progressive space, after Kamala Harris became the top of the ticket, that was the shot in the arm that a lot of organizations on the left needed. President Biden, very well respected, did a great job as president, but his message politically was not resonating. Kamala Harris gave us a second look, not just with the Democratic base, but with low propensity voters, folks that will need to turn out to keep that anti-Trump coalition together. So things are looking better. We've got to finish strong. We've got to get people out knocking doors. That's why, at Move On, we're so excited about some of the work that we're doing with our community-based relational organizing with partners like Vote Rev, who are helping to make sure that we're not only doing kind of this community-based organizing, but we're doing it with the advantage of really smart behavioral science behind it as well.
I want to get to that in a minute. I think you raised an interesting point there, which is that in 2016, Trump really did win, at least not nationally, but in the swing states, enough swing states to win through the Electoral College without much of a ground game, because he knows how to turn out a certain type of low propensity conservative voter. We saw that again in 2020. And right now, I'm wondering, and maybe you can shed some light on this, whether he can squeeze that juice out of the lemon one more time without the operation. What's your sense of that?
Well, let's think about what he's trying to do, right? You mentioned the low propensity voters, but let's be crystal clear about what we're talking about. These are mostly white male voters, kind of the Joe Rogan, Barstool Sports, that kind of universe of folks who are very low propensity voters, who are not interested, have low trust in politics, and who are turned on by, conspiracy theories, and who are, frankly engaged by the type of ugly rhetoric we saw at the recent Madison Square Garden rally that Donald Trump and his, gang of MAGA allies put on a few days ago. So these are the folks they're trying to reach. It's not an expansion strategy to go and find swing voters. They're not trying to go win over people in the middle. They're not trying to win over the Bulwark crowd. They're not trying to win over, Never Trumpers or Nikki Haley voters. They're going after people who are less likely to vote. One of the advantages of what they're trying to do is that there are a larger pool of those voters. Those folks are also less likely to show up. And I think that, that is something as a Democrat that you got to feel good about, is that the voters that Kamala Harris is trying to turn out in the closing days are folks who are more likely to show up. And the folks that Donald Trump wants to get out, the persuadables that he's identified, they're less likely to show up. Does that mean she's going to win and he's going to lose? No, but I like our chances with that equation.
So I want to point out to listeners that it's not a joke that he's outsourcing some of his get out the vote to Charlie Kirk. He actually is relying on a certain type of young male podcaster to get this Barstool vote out. But on the other side of the equation, the Harris operation, and nobody ever talks about this for some reason, is also trying to target another type of low propensity voter with the help now of that Madison Square Garden hate rally, trying to move Hispanics in Pennsylvania, for instance. Can you talk about the Harris efforts to reach low propensity voters? Who are those voters? I mean, Trump is going after these low propensity male The Harris operation, as you say, has a smaller pool of low propensity voters to draw on, but they are trying to get them. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. And it kind of depends on where you are. So if you're in a state like Pennsylvania, look, you talked about the Madison Square Garden rally. There are 400,000 Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania who probably did not like their of course, Puerto Rico is a part of the United States, but did not like their native island being called an island of garbage. That is a very important message to get in front of those folks over and over and over again through paid media, through door-to-door contacts. And we know that the campaign has plenty resources to do that. Maybe if you're in a place like Michigan, there are folks who maybe in the past would have supported like a Nikki Haley, but they feel alienated by Donald Trump and by this version of the Republican Party. And so that's why Kamala Harris has been going on tours with folks like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. That's why she is going to uncommon places and finding kind of strange bedfellows, because she understands that broad coalition, you've got to keep them together from 2020 in order to be able to defeat Trump again. That's also, frankly, why groups like ours and others in the progressive space have been working to make sure voters understand the important stakes of not parking your protest vote with a third-party candidate like a Jill Stein or an RFK Jr. in the past or No Labels in the past. We know that every vote in an election this close is going to make a difference. And I think that Democrats have gotten really good at understanding what it means to coalition build and to maintain that coalition.
So it's interesting. You really have a coalition of low propensity voters that the Harris campaign and Democrats are going after. She's campaigning with Jennifer Lopez, which is clearly an effort to capitalize on the Madison Square Garden hate rally and Hispanics. Democratic Party is reaching out pretty hard to voters who might be tempted by RFK or a third-party candidate. That is definitely a certain type of low propensity voter who might be gettable for Democrats. And as you said earlier, the pool is smaller of these voters for Harris than it is for Trump, but it exists, right? Can you talk about who those voters are?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on where we're talking about geographically, right? So you alluded to J-Lo. In a place like Nevada, they might be younger Hispanic voters who are like new to that marketplace, right? In Pennsylvania, you mentioned the Madison Square Garden rally. There's 400,000 or so Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania who you can bet that the Harris campaign is going to make sure sees what happened at that rally and hears some of the dreck that was coming from those speakers and the really disgusting comments about Puerto Rico and just other it's so funny. The focus on those comments kind of takes the attention off the fact that Donald Trump has been talking like that the whole time. But that was a breakthrough moment, and they have the resources to put that in front of those voters. And then maybe in a place like Michigan, you have a different type of voter. Maybe they are more open to a Nikki Haley, and they were thinking about sitting this out. So they're choosing between not Harris and Trump, but maybe the couch and Harris. And you can go after those voters. And, I think the campaign has shown itself to be really smart about alternating kind of their tactic around all of those different universes of voters.
They definitely are adopting a whole bunch of different targeted messages. I want to bring up what some new polls are telling us about a problem that Trump faces. CNN finds Harris up over Trump by 5 in Michigan, 6 in Wisconsin, and a tie in Pennsylvania. I think those Michigan and Wisconsin numbers are a bit rosy, but the poll finds her narrowly ahead among those extremely motivated to vote in all those 3 states. New Marquette poll puts Harris up 1 in Wisconsin, finds Democrats have an enthusiasm edge there. New Monmouth poll has a tie in Pennsylvania. That finds her significantly up with frequent voters, whereas Trump does better with much more infrequent voters. Does that put more pressure on Trump to get out these low propensity voters on his side? And can his ground game do that or not?
Yeah, I guess the way I always talk about this and I think about it is Kamala Harris, it would appear, has a higher ceiling, and she has more of a pool of available voters who are willing to potentially vote for her. Now, she doesn't have the name ID that Donald Trump does, and where she has name ID, it is not the depth of name ID where they understand her political philosophy the way they might understand Donald Trump's. So there's work to do in educating new voters or people who are new to Kamala Harris. I know that, political junkies like you and I may not believe this, but there are people who literally within the last 10 days are just plugging into this campaign.
Yep.
And so you have to catch them up and help them understand. But I do think that Kamala Harris has to feel like she's got some wind at her back coming down the stretch here. A lot of the public polls, one thing that I'll point out, they have Harris underperforming with African-American voters as an example. To believe that, you would have to believe that she's going to underperform by anywhere from 8 to 12 points what Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden did with black voters. Now, is that possible? Sure. That would suggest a pretty significant resetting of the coalitions. I'm not sure if the evidence is there on the ground beyond bluster and beyond some anecdotes that that's the case. And so those are the political realities that both of the campaigns are jousting with right now. And, as a lot of people have said, you'd rather be Kamala Harris with this set of political circumstances than Donald Trump.
Let me ask you about what you guys are doing to get out the vote. Move On is using something called community vote tripling, which involves friend-to-friend outreach. Can you tell us what that's all about?
Yeah, appreciate you asking. Look, Move On, at our core, we are a community organization. We're an online community organization, but we have always, not just in recent years, but always found this to be a really useful way to get at voters. It gets around the filters of kind of lower trust information sources. We know that we're in an era of misinformation and in, degraded trust in institutions. So when you're able to have an organization like ours that can go and that can do community-based relational organizing, block by block, precinct by precinct, through friends, neighbors, people you know and you trust, we find that to be really valuable in a moment like this where you need people to have high trust messengers in front of them. And our vote tripling allows us to use our pool of members to get to some of these hard to reach voters. There's, we call them surge voters. There's about 1.5 million of them across the battleground states. And in many cases, they make the difference. And they certainly made a difference in 2020. And we think they'll make the difference again in 2024. And we're able to get in front of those folks through their friends and their neighbors. And we just find that to be more sustainable and more impactful. The other thing I will say is we've got great partners. We've worked with VoteRev, who is a really creative entity that takes our experience in community-based organizing and relational organizing and matches it with behavioral data science and presents that as a real, a real smart way to figure out, well, what's going to move these folks most? What information do we need to get in front of them to get them off the couch? Is someone who is in our target universe, did they not see that MSG rally? And if they didn't, what's the best way to get in front of them? That type of technology helps us do that. And we found a lot of success with it, and particularly in a cycle like the one we're in right now, we think it's going to be really impactful going down the stretch.
It really is clear that Democrats are experimenting with a whole bunch of new GOTV techniques and stuff. It's very impressive, I have to say. Can I ask, though, you mentioned earlier that that Democrats do have to be concerned about the loss of African-American votes. This is a real thing. Also, other non-white groups like Hispanics have been drifting to Trump. All that's a genuine problem for Democrats. But how real is it, do you think? The data seems mixed on that. There are reasons to distrust it, or at least to kind of be a little skeptical of it. What are you guys seeing out there? How big a problem is it, and is it reversible?
Well, I'll start with what you said. The data is mixed. I think, look, anecdotally, it would be fair to say that there is a less strong grip on some parts of the African-American and Latino vote share than there has been in the past on behalf of Democrats, right? And there's a lot of reasons for that. Economic challenges for those communities, as I like to say, they are like any other community in the country who feels the brunt of rising prices and maybe wants to buy a home but can't afford to do it, right? Those communities feel that as well. Combined with that, I don't want to give Donald Trump credit, but I will say Donald Trump has made at least a surface level effort to make a pitch to those voters. Now, as an African-American political consultant, I'll say, I think that's good. I think it's good that those voters are being treated as a persuasion universe, but that presents a challenge now for Democrats to not just retain those voters as a GOTV target, but to treat them as a persuasion target, right? They're not just a turnout universe that you reach out to 2 weeks before Election Day and give them logistics about where to vote, but you actually need to be on a regular basis persuading and earning their vote. The good thing about Kamala Harris is she's very clear about this. She has on many occasions publicly talked about the need to earn the votes of these communities and to not take them for granted. So I think you got the right candidate with the right frame of mind to continue to be viable with those groups of voters. I do think it's unsustainable for Democrats to expect over the long term that you're going to have 90, 91, 92% vote share with African Americans. We know that historically in recent elections, the Latino vote share has gone down a bit. Depending on who you believe, Donald Trump may get anywhere from 35 to 40% of the Latino vote this time around. I think that there's evidence to suggest that Republicans are going to continue to be more competitive with Latino votes, in the near future. So I think Democrats are going to have to vie for those voters maybe a little bit more aggressively, and not just as turnout voters, but as persuasion voters.
Absolutely right. To wrap this up, Joel, tell us how Harris gets to a victory from point A to point B to winning on the ground. What has to happen on the ground? And what are the three things about the ground that keep you awake at night that could go wrong?
So it's a turnout election, right? I mean, you went through polls, and I think you gave a very good analysis of it. But really, at the end of the day, what that tells me is that this is a turnout election. So that means that we know it's close, and it's just about what is your muscle on the ground? What's your organization? I worked for Harry Reid about a decade ago. I'm familiar with that Reid machine in Nevada. What are the mechanics looking like in places like Pennsylvania and North Carolina? Are you talking to the right people? Have you activated community-based organizers and trusted messengers on the ground in all those places? So that's what I'm looking for. I'll say one kind of big picture thing is the gender gap. I think that in this election, the gender gap is going to be really significant to look at. Kamala Harris clearly is going to perform well with a lot of women voters. I think a determining stat in this election might be, can her kind of gender advantage with women outflank Trump's gender advantage with men? And I'm sure that the Harris campaign is thinking about that as well. And she wants to mitigate her challenges and, some of her shortcomings with male voters, particularly in rural parts of the country where Democrats tend to struggle.
So what's the bottom line then? Two things, right? That gender gap has to hold. In other words, she has to really get that big double-digit lead over women. And female voters have to be at least, 55% of the electorate? And then maybe she wins. But if that doesn't happen, if the female vote doesn't come out at the levels we expect it to, and there's this unexpected surge of young male voters, then he wins, right? Is that the bottom line?
I think that's a good way to top line it. And look, his potential surge with young male voters could be offset if she surges with, let's say, a white college graduate women who identify as white. She could surge with that population of voters, or she could overperform based on what the public polls are saying with black voters, particularly black men. There are places where she could offset his gain. So now it's a question of, all right, so use the early vote window, the time that we're in right now, to lock down your for sure voters, and then spend that time on election day and right before election day, getting in front of those sometimes voters, the folks that you might have to nudge to get out, that you might have to, do a little bit more of a tried and true persuasion effort into turnout on the last hours of the campaign to get them to show up. And again, David Plouffe, Jen O'Malley Dillon, I like our chances with smart folks like that at the head of that organization.
Well, they've certainly been there. They've certainly been in battle before, and so they've done well. Joel Payne, thanks so much for coming on with us today, man.
Greg, always a pleasure. Always happy to join you.
You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler and the DSR Network.